refund for not only this endorsement, but everything that you have done to make it possible for somebody like me to do something like this. And there's a whole bunch of out-elected officials, current and former, here. Please raise your hand and be recognized, because we are standing on your shoulders and we thank you. This campaign is for everybody who's been told that they're less than. Everybody who's been on the wrong side of an equation of belonging in this country. And it is fitting that we stand here 50 years after Stonewall, 50 years after a cruel reminder of the ways in which power pressed down on those who were different because they were different, and those who were different realized that they could take power and turn it around. That's what the consciousness of the LGBTQ identity means today. And through those last 50 years, we haven't seen equality come to the land, not by a long shot. But think about what it means that 50 years after Stonewall, we could be gathered in a room with a top-tier candidate for the American presidency and be in a room with his husband. To have a politics that looks to the future and insists that it be better than the past. There is still far too much use of the word again in American politics right now. I'm here to say that there is no constructive and honest politics that revolves around the word again. There is only the future and the insistence that it be better than what came before. That's why we're running. I think a lot about the year. My stump speech used to be that I think about 2054, and then the wheel turned a bit. Now it's 2055. The year I get to the current age of the current president. And I want you to picture what 2055 just might look like. Picture what it would mean in 2055 to be able to say that the decisions we made in 2020 brought an end to climate disruption. What would it mean to be able to say that the decisions we made in 2020 brought us to the place where in 2055, your race has zero bearing on your life expectancy, your income, your health outcomes, or your relationship with law enforcement? Think about what it means if we make the choices now so that later it'll be possible to say that a rising tide really does lift all boats in this country. We have the power to do that if we recognize the gravity of this moment, if we recognize the opportunity that is in front of us, if we treat the next 3, 4, and 5 years according to their power to decide what the next 30, 40, and 50 are going to look like. Because we cannot go on doing what we've been doing, and we cannot accept the idea that a return to normal would be anything but a disappointment. We're going to make a new normal, and we're going to make it better than anything America's ever seen. And who better than a gay candidate enjoying his first year, entering the second year of his enjoyment of the freedom to marry, to remind everybody that freedom is not property of the Republican Party, the conservative movement. Freedom is an American value that all of us live for. It's a good moment in the shadow of the memory of Stonewall when basic physical security was denied to gay people, queer people being beaten up for who they were, that we remind everybody that security is not a value that belongs to the Republican Party, the conservative side of the aisle. Maybe now Now that we have out-elected officials in, as Mayor Parker said, every office you can think of but one, maybe now is the time to remind everybody that democracy is the engine of equalization in this great nation of ours, if we make it so. These are our values, and our values will anchor our work each day as we move ahead, policy by policy, but not because of the technicalities of the policy, but because of the values that they uphold. We recognize what is at stake. We know what this means. And we also know that we're not there yet. It is extraordinary to contemplate the fact that at the beginning of this decade, you could either be out or you could be in the military, but you couldn't be both. That at least where I come from, you could either be out or you could run for office, but you couldn't do both. And that now, I'm standing before you as a married veteran running for President of the United States. It's extraordinary. But that should propel us in the awareness that we're not even close to where we need to be. Not when there's not an Equality Act to establish that no one should be mistreated because of who they are or who they love. We've got to bring that about. Not at a time when youth are so much more likely to be homeless if they're LGBTQ. We've got to be the generation to put an end to that. When black trans women, day after day, week after week, are losing their lives to violence at a rate that is unconscionable, we've got to recognize our obligation to advance progress and equality. When a trans person puts their life on the line for this country wearing a uniform that this president avoided with a fake disability when it was his turn, we have an obligation to put that right. We have an obligation and we have an opportunity. Because the story of the advancements for the LGBTQ community, yes, it is a story of people standing up for their rights, but it's also a story of people standing up for each other. And if there was ever a moment when we needed to stand up for each other, it's now. We celebrate our identities. We recognize the differences in our identities. We do not try to wave away what identity means. But we have a choice about what identity is going to mean for us. We're not going to allow it to turn into "you don't know me." We're going to insist that it'll turn into "I will stand up for you, whether you are like me or not." It's why it's twice as important that men be standing up for women's reproductive freedom at a time like this. It's why it is twice as important that if you're not from a community of color, you are there for every step toward equality for those who are. And yes, it's why our straight friends and allies are more than welcome and urged to be with us along the way. We couldn't do it without you. This is how we change this story. This is how we change the future of this country. We will not let this president, or this vice president, we will not let them. I know. Look, you got a whole other thing to represent Indiana by if you just put somebody like me in. We're not going to let them define down what the American character is. We're going to build it up instead. We're going to do something completely different. There's a temptation right now to compete for who's going to be the best politician to go on his show and serve up the zingers that are going to knock this president out. But here's the thing. I don't even know what kind of show it is that he's got going on. You can call it a... I heard that. I was going to go with game show or reality show. We can settle on horror show.
Lying show.
The point is, we're not going to be part of that show. We're going to pick up the remote and we're going to change the channel. Will you help me change the channel? new day in American politics.
Yes.
And as grim as this moment might be, will you help me find joy in that process?
Yes.
And we can't lose. We can't lose.
No.
Now, this campaign started out in living rooms. It started out in an office in South Bend that resembled the 1940s detective agency in the Tower Building with enough seats for 5 people. And we're still used to kind of a sense of intimacy, having conversations. Admittedly, this is a big conversation, but we still want to have that. So we've gathered up some questions from folks who are here. And I think it's safe to say that the person who's going to help us out with questions is probably the most popular resident of our household. Very excited to see Chasten. Then will you please welcome my better half, Chasten Glesman-Buttigieg, to the stage.
Happy birthday. Happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Chasten. Happy birthday to you.
How about that?
That's quite a gift. Thank you. Man. And the best present would be sending this guy to the White House. Thanks for joining us. All right, I've got some great questions lined up for you. Wow. Singer, right off the bat. Did your style improve when Chasten came on the scene?
Well, my socks match, so that's progress.
It was a plan. That was totally my question. Okay.
He's actually threatened to withdraw my gay membership card over my choice of socks before, so.
You can't come to our meetings anymore unless you match your socks. Okay. All right, let's get into it. How do you plan on taking better steps to protecting trans lives and rights?
All right, thank you. So this is part of what I mean when we talk about standing up for each other. Yeah, I'm in the same alphabet soup as trans Americans, but we know that their experience is different. It's different than mine. And that's why it's so important that we be standing up for trans Americans. There's a war going on against trans Americans, and we have got to put an end to it. The Equality Act will put an end to it. Ending the trans military ban will put an end to it. Making sure that law enforcement has the cultural competency to support and not harm trans Americans that they encounter as part of it. Trans representation is part of it, and the Victory Fund's already done fantastic work to make that possible, but we need that in our appointments too. It goes a lot farther than do no harm. We've got to understand that our character as a country depends on what we do for those among us who are vulnerable. And we've got to be standing up for trans Americans right now, no matter what shoes we walk in ourselves. We also ought to help get more of them elected to office, so that's where victory comes in.
Regarding education, do you support inclusive, safe schools for LGBTQ curriculum? And thank you from a transgender teacher and Maplewood Democratic Committee.
Oh, fantastic. Are you here in the house somewhere? Here. Wow, way in the back. Well, thank you for what you're doing for education. Having married an educator, I get an education about education pretty much every day. And look, the path to equality largely starts in our schools. It's making sure students are supported. It's making sure we have education that's based on reality that is inclusive. And by the way, there's this myth that sort of rural America can't handle this. Remember when the president's guidance on bathroom access came out under President Obama? Everybody got kind of activated in the conservative movement. Everybody's saying, well, what's the mayor going to do in South Bend? It's Indiana, it's a conservative state. And people were wondering what the consequences were going to be. I had my first interview after that guidance came out, and the interviewer said, kind of with a disbelieving face, like, so do you support these accommodations? And I said, yeah, who's it hurting? And we didn't hear about it again. There's common sense to making sure that our children are taken care of, no matter who they are, no matter what they're discovering about themselves, especially in those tender moments of childhood. Grade school, middle school, high school. It's a terrifying place when you're LGBTQ. It's a terrifying place when you're not LGBTQ. Yeah. So from a policy standpoint, the Department of Education needs to recognize that. From a health standpoint, our health policies, especially mental health support and parity for the issues that our kids are facing, are important. And I also just think it wouldn't hurt to have a Secretary of Education who actually believes in inclusive public education.
I can't wait to see what you got me. All right, babe. When you were in Afghanistan, what did you think about the most?
Wow. So I was reflecting on that because I got a message overnight from some buddies of mine who were talking about how they're there now. And they were talking about how strange it was for them to be in the chow hall watching footage of me from the debate. By the way, anybody catch the debate last night? How'd I do? So it meant a lot obviously to hear from friends who were over there, but then I was thinking about the fact that when I left 5 years ago, I thought I was one of the last people turning out the lights. And we're still there. We're not that far off, I'm afraid, from the day when we read the news that somebody was lost in Afghanistan, an American who was not alive on 9/11. It's why we've got to put an end to endless war. And so one of the things I wrote about in the book is one of the things that was on my mind then, one of the things I thought about the most was how wars end. You know, we read about it in history books, like they have beginning years and end years, like human lives. Like everybody agrees when a war began and when it ended, but the reality is it's complicated. It's complicated, it's hard to end a war, which is why you don't start one if you have any alternative. So I thought about that a lot. I thought about home a lot. And one of the things I thought about was the fact that if I didn't come back, then I would have made it into my early 30s, lost my life in a conflict as a homeowner and the mayor of my city and a well-traveled person and a grown-ass man with no idea what it was like to be in love. And that's how I knew it was time to come out. Everybody who gets deployed grows in their deployment. That's one of the ways that I grew, and if it weren't for that, I might have dragged my feet even longer and never met this guy, so it all worked out pretty well.
Who asked who to marry?
You want to lead this one?
Oh, well, that's a... Sure, I'll try to wrap it up quickly. Pete and I were supposed to be on a vacation together in Europe, and he was trying to make the decision whether or not he was going to run for DNC chair. So he stayed back home for a couple days, and I went on the first part of the trip by myself. And during that trip, I was on a flight in Eastern Europe in which there was a bomb scare on board. And ended safely, obviously, but by the time I got to Berlin, I realized how unfair it would have been had I not had the chance to spend the rest of my life with Peter. So once Peter caught up to me in Berlin, I knew that he was not ready for marriage yet. But I knew that I had to tell him how I felt. But I needed to acknowledge the fact that he needed time. So I gave him that watch. And I told him to take his time, but told him I was ready.
He didn't say how much time, but at that point, you know how sometimes a really important decision in life, by the time you sort of make the decision, it's already made inside you. That's how it felt by the time I went and picked up the ring.
What part of campaigning thus far has surprised you?
Let's see. So many things. One interesting one is nutrition. So I'd say the campaign diet's actually been pretty good, and it's because most of my meals are now in vehicles. Because if you go to an event where there's food, it's not like you get to eat, right? Because you're working and talking to people. So if you're lucky, they grab up some food, and then it's with you in the vehicle while you go to the next event. Like after this thing, there'll probably be something in the vehicle, and I'll eat. So I guess just some of that like day-to-day stuff is surprising. The biggest thing that's a pleasant surprise is just how seriously voters are taking the future. And this is not a game, not this time around. People get that. And when you go to these early states, they're not asking. You go to Iowa, I mean, they're not asking about parochial backyard concerns. They're asking the same kinds of questions that people in Brooklyn are asking. They want to know about the role of the U.S. in the world. They want to know how we're going to stitch the American fabric back together. These are deep, searching questions, and as awful as a time as this is politically, if nothing else, I think it's got the capacity to bring out the best in us, because we're asking not just day-to-day questions, we're asking fundamental questions, and now is a time for fundamental questions.
I would say I will never forget that mom we met in Des Moines. One of the first times we went there for a rally. 1,600 people, Peter and I stayed until we shook every hand, took every selfie, and the sun had gone down. It had been a couple hours, and just when you're getting tired and you're ready to go home, this mom sort of elbowed her way up to the front of the rope line and had tears in her eyes, and her voice was trembling, and she grabbed me by the shoulders and she said, I need you to know that my daughter opened up to me that she was going to take her life. And then she saw you and your husband, and you saved her. You're the reason that she's here. She has hope again. And when think about how, one, we are standing on the shoulders of giants, and the ability to be here on the stage and in front of all of you is because of the black trans women who stood up for us 50 years ago, who propelled us to this moment. I think about how proud they would be to know that there is this day where a young girl in Iowa is holding out hope and is staying on this earth because she sees herself finally represented in American politics at the national level. And that's also in part because of all the people in this room. I mean, when we come out, we do tremendous things for other people. And when the chips are down and when we have a hard week and it feels like you don't want to do anything and you'd rather run back home and think about that mom in Iowa and that daughter and what we are all doing together as a community to literally save lives. Here's a good one for a mayor. What's the best way the federal government can help cities and towns invest in infrastructure? Ooh. Look at the eyes light up. Sewers. Streets.
All right, let's talk about wastewater.
Good night, everybody. Thank you, Simon.
Now, here's the thing. All right, I won't take you into the details of my views on wastewater modernization, but what I will say is this is part of what I mean when I talk about freedom being at stake, that there's a lot more to freedom than just cutting a regulation on a bank somewhere. That we don't have freedom if we don't have infrastructure. The fact that you got up in the morning, I hope, did not have to think about where you could get a glass of clean, safe drinking water. The fact that you had the opportunity to assume that the water coming out of your tap was safe meant that whatever it is you were thinking about when you had your first sip of water today, it was something a little closer to what matters to you in life. And that's what it means to have good water and good roads and all the basics. We in cities worry about these things, trash pickup, animal control. We worry about it so that other people don't have to. That's the foundation on which everything else rests. It's not sexy, it's not glamorous, and even within infrastructure. I think that, there's a lot to be said for bullet trains and airports, and we care about that. There's also a lot to be said for what's underground. So the best thing the federal government could do for urban infrastructure is properly fund urban infrastructure. And we create a lot of jobs while we're at it.
All right. We're going to end this evening with all these folks the way you and I end our day. And I encourage you to do this with your loved one. One thing that made you smile today.
Wow. I was going to say, yeah, it's hard not to smile when I'm looking out at everybody who's here. And I hope everybody here understands the power that's in your hands. That you have the opportunity to change the way people think in this country. And that's what we can do. We're not just asking you, obviously we asked you to support this campaign. We're also asking you to shape it, to invite people who may not have felt touched yet or included yet, to invite them to shape it, to share your stories and let us be an amplifier for the stories you have to tell. But I will also say the support that you lend us, obviously the material support and the doors we're going to ask you to knock on if we haven't already, and all the other things we're going to ask for you, is big, but also the moral support. Just knowing on a long day, and the days can be long, knowing that you're here, knowing that you're lifting us up, not as a personal favor, but because we share these values. That's always going to bring a smile to my face.
It's something we get to do a lot when we're on the stage together. We'll get personal real quick. If you're comfortable, and this always brings a smile to my face, and I promise it's good in the end. Raise your hand if you've ever felt like there wasn't space for you in this world. That you didn't belong, that there was not space for you. You can put your hand down. Now raise your hand if you would stick up for someone in this room who also felt left out, that there was not space for them in this world, and that you will fight for them every day. This is the thing that makes me smile every day, that this community will support one another, and we are here for you, and you are perfect just the way you are, and you are loved just the way you are. You're a beautiful community. Any closing thoughts, Mayor Pete?
Did I marry up or what? Beginning of a long journey. I cannot thank you enough. We stand on your shoulders. We're going to change the world together. And I need you at my side every step of the way. Are you in this with us all the way until the mountain? Hear your voice and we'll see you on the campaign trail. Thank you.